You know what I keep noticing about the Smithsonian castle pictures? Every single one I see is one of a finished building. Nice stone, clean towers, perfect framing. It looks like it just appeared. You peer closer and the scaffolding's gone, the workers are gone, even the dirt and chaos are gone. All you get is this perfectly polished fortress, like it descended from the sky instead of being built by hand. And it's the same thing with a whole lot of old world buildings. European castles, churches, government halls, the whole fucking kit and caboodle. The only photos we ever get are the ones finished monument in its full authority. No half-finished walls, no drop stone, no horse-drawn wagons struggling on unpaved roads. No construction mess, just this pristine, timeless icon that looks like it's been there forever. Which is wild because this thing was built in the 80s and 1850s. No power tools, no paved roads, no skyscrapers catching the light behind it, just muscle, rope, and stone. Yet the image we see treat it like it's always been there, like its authority is natural, not constructed. So here's the question. When you see that perfect finished Smithsonian castle, you ask yourself, where are all the shots of the people who built it? Where are the workers, the accidents, the arguments, the real messy labor of history? Because if we only see the building when it's done, we're only seeing the shiny version of history, and we're missing the real labor, the real politics, the real story of how the power got built in the first place, which is exactly what we're here to dig in today. So welcome to Wisdom Synergy. We're talking about the Smithsonian Castle, the stories they finally started to tell, and the stories they're still leaving out. You ever notice how the places they call neutral and educational are often the ones doing the most editing of history? Today we're talking about the Smithsonian Castle, the original heart of the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C., and the quietly huge renovation they're doing for their 250th anniversary program. On the surface, it's just a museum upgrade, but if you squint, you can see reshuffling of the American history story itself. So let's get this straight. They're reopening a 19th century Gothic castle in the middle of the Capitol, dusting off the secret rooms and even the crypt, and everyone's supposed to treat that like a boring architecture tour. The official line is, here's our beautiful historic building. Nice restoration, big commemoration of 250 years. But the subtext is, and while we're at it, let's quietly reframe how you think about where America came from. The castle is the physical home of the institution that, for a long time, spoke with the authority of science and history, curated exhibits, planted narratives, and buried contradictions. It's also the place where dead presidents got stored, experiments got run, and native stories were often documented or erased depending on who was in charge. So now they're giving guided tours into the normally off-limits area, the crypt, the old labs, the warren of rooms that used to host everything from dead presidents to secret experiments, and quietly talking about our shared future and inclusive storytelling, which sounds very noble until you ask, inclusive compared to what story were they telling before? When an institution as big as the Smithsonian suddenly says, we're being more honest and inclusive, the first question should be, inclusive of what voice did you just realize you were leaving out? The castle's not just a pretty old building, it's symbolic of how mainstream stories get polished while the complicated, uncomfortable parts get stored into the back, like objects in a locked archival room. You can almost see this as a pattern when you look elsewhere. There's small but growing wave of events and local talks about the war historians sometimes call the least known war in early American history, King Philip's War. That's a brutal conflict in the 1670s where English colonists, native communities, and their alliance collide in a fight that ends with massive deaths, land grabs, and rewritten narratives that flatten native residents into a footnote. But in the mainstream school version, it's either skipped or mentioned so briefly that you think it was a sidebar. Underground history groups, local museums, and some native-led events are the ones actually digging into saying this is foundational, not optional. And the Smithsonian's new inclusive storytelling project feels like a national level echo of that. The same old institution now realizing they can't afford to keep treating these stories as marginal anymore. The thing you can't say nicely is they're only doing this now because the pressure's too loud to ignore. Demographics have changed, politics have shifted, and the internet has made it impossible to keep certain histories locked in the basement forever. So when they open the castle's secret rooms, they're not just doing renovation work, they're doing rebranding. The castle was being positioned as a space of shared future, but the soil under it is soaked with the old stories they used to silence. Because on the surface, it's a museum tour. Underneath, it's a case study in how power controls history and then slowly pretends it discovered the truth all along. So here's what I want listeners to ask themselves. When you were a kid, what did you actually learn about where America came from? And what felt like an afterthought, a side note, or something you heard only once and never again? Because that gap is exactly where the hidden history lies. The castle's reopening is a change to look at what finally is being shown and what's still not fully on the map. So if you're wondering whether the Smithsonian is genuinely changing its narrative or just carefully repackaging it for the 21st century, that's the right kind of suspicious question to keep asking. So for now, that's Wisdom Synergy asking you to look past the nice polished version of the institution and see the stories they're still not shouting from the rooftops. Next episode, we might swap out the museum halls and talk about what the underground metal bands and that are getting all of the underground energy, but almost none of the mainstream hype. And that's why some stories get loud and others get quiet. So stick around, stay curious, and keep questioning what they're really being shown.